The autumn rain tapped gently against the cracked windows of Jessica Harmon's newly purchased farmhouse as she pried loose another piece of damaged floorboard from the old kitchen. Grey light filtered through the clouded panes, casting long shadows across the century-old pine planks that had witnessed generations of footsteps before hers. Jessica paused, brushing a strand of chestnut hair from her face with a dust-covered hand, her keen hazel eyes examining the peculiar unevenness in the subfloor that had caught her attention. 3 months in this dilapidated rural Maryland homestead had taught her to question every structural oddity. Most locals in Coopersville dismissed her renovation project as a fool's errand, but Jessica knew better. In these forgotten corners of American history, patience often revealed secrets worth uncovering. Before we jump into her discovery, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something truly extraordinary for your feed. Her gaze settled on a small gap that had appeared beneath the removed floorboard, a shadowy space where the foundation should have been solid. She knelt closer, running her fingers along the edge of the opening, feeling the unmistakable smoothness of deliberately cut stone rather than the rough foundation material she'd expected. The inconsistency raised immediate questions. Jessica had renovated 3 homes before this one, but always in suburban neighborhoods where the most exciting discovery might be outdated electrical wiring or a forgotten time capsule in the attic. This rural property, with its sagging wraparound porch and overgrown 5 acres, represented both her biggest challenge and her last chance to create stability for herself and her 10-year-old daughter, Lily. Inside the sprawling 1850s farmhouse, Jessica had established an organized chaos of renovation supplies. Carefully labeled bins of hardware lined the dining room walls. Restoration manuals were stacked on the antique sideboard, and detailed plans covered the makeshift plywood work table in what would eventually become a cozy family room. The toolbox beside her contained precision instruments acquired during her 8 years as a combat engineer before a roadside IED in Afghanistan abruptly ended her military career. The measuring tape showed the dimensions of the unusual gap, approximately 18 inches wide and stretching beyond the beam of her flashlight when she directed it into the darkness. The property had been Jessica's calculated risk, a foreclosure, obtained at a price that made her modest VA loan and savings stretch just far enough. When the real estate agent unlocked the front door 3 months ago, his skeptical expression made his thoughts clear. A single mother with a visible limp had no business taking on a structural disaster like the Whitaker Homestead. "You're just asking for trouble with a property this old, Ms. Harmon," County Inspector Reynolds had warned during his reluctant assessment last week. "These pre-Civil War structures have issues you can't possibly anticipate. You should consider selling to the developer who's buying up parcels in this area." Jessica had thanked him for his concern while politely ignoring his suggestion. But the developer's protection came with constraints she wasn't willing to accept, particularly the erasure of historical elements that had initially drawn her to the property despite its challenges. The insistent ping of an incoming text message interrupted her examination. Jessica checked her phone, reading a message from Marcus Green, the local history professor who had shown unexpected interest in her renovation project. She'd met him at the Coopersville Historical Society meeting where she'd gone seeking information about the original Whitaker family who built the house, found additional information on the property. Tax records from 1853 to 1859 show unusual grain deliveries, much more than the small farm could produce. Might explain some structural oddities. "Can I stop by tomorrow?" Jessica smiled slightly. Marcus had been generously sharing his research expertise, helping her document the homestead's history for the historical designation she hoped might provide tax benefits and preservation grants. His enthusiasm for the project had been a welcome counterpoint to the town's general skepticism about her undertaking. "Perfect timing," she texted back. "Just found something interesting in the kitchen floor. Tomorrow at 10. She added a photograph of the opening she'd discovered. His response came quickly. "Fascinating. Don't disturb it further until I arrive." This could be significant. Jessica set her phone aside, intrigued by his caution. She directed her flashlight once more into the opening, noticing now what appeared to be the edge of a stone stair descending into darkness. The farmhouse's location near the Pennsylvania border suddenly took on new significance as historical possibilities clicked into place. During her military service, Jessica had developed a methodical approach to the unknown. She documented her discovery with careful photographs, measuring the opening precisely and noting the construction techniques visible in the stonework. Whatever lay beneath her kitchen floor represented deliberately concealed architecture, not some haphazard foundation repair. As evening settled over the farmhouse, Jessica completed her daily security check, a habit carried over from her military days. She tested the locks on doors and windows, checked that the motion-activated lights illuminated the perimeter, and ensured her daughter's bedroom remained the most finished and comfortable space in the house. Lily was spending the weekend with Jessica's parents in Baltimore, giving her mother uninterrupted renovation time. Their temporary living conditions remained challenging. The functional bathroom was still incomplete, and the kitchen consisted mainly of a microwave, coffee maker, and mini fridge. But Jessica had created a sanctuary for Lily amid the construction, with colorful curtains and a bookshelf filled with her daughter's favorite stories. After securing the house, Jessica sat at her work table, reviewing the historical documents she'd collected about the property. The Whitaker family had owned the homestead from its construction in 1852 until 1875. Jeremiah Whitaker, a Quaker farmer, had built the original structure, though little information about him surfaced in local historical records beyond tax documents and church membership. Jessica pulled out the property's original deed, studying the elegant handwriting that detailed boundary markers now long forgotten. Something about the document had always struck her as peculiar. The property lines included unusual references to the lightning-struck oak and 3 stones placed in brotherhood. Poetic language seemed out of place in a legal document, yet the county had transferred these same descriptions through subsequent deeds. A small leather-bound book she'd found behind a loose baseboard during her bedroom renovation lay beside. The deed, the journal, belonged to Hannah Whitaker, presumably Jeremiah's wife, though she wrote little about herself. Most entries documented weather conditions, crop rotations, and visitor notations that seemed oddly coded. 2 seekers sheltered during thunderstorm, or family of 4 received and directed northward under God's faithful stars. Jessica had assumed these were religious references typical of Quaker writing, but the discovery beneath her kitchen floor cast these cryptic entries in a new light. The journal entries spanned from 1853 to 1861, abruptly ending just as the Civil War began. She reached for her laptop, searching for information about Underground Railroad activities in Maryland's northern counties. Most documented routes showed Philadelphia and Wilmington as major hubs for escaped slaves traveling north, but the rural areas between held countless undocumented stations where sympathetic families provided temporary shelter and assistance. While the mainstream historical narratives focused on well-known abolitionists like Harriet Tubman, Jessica knew history's margins often contained equally important stories, preserved only in family legends and structural anomalies like the one she'd discovered today. As night deepened outside the old farmhouse, Jessica heard the distinctive sound of a vehicle approaching on the gravel driveway. She tensed momentarily. Visitors were rare at this hour, especially given the property's isolation at the end of a quarter-mile private road. She moved to the front window, peering through. The darkness toward the approaching headlights. The vehicle was familiar, the battered blue pickup belonging to Samuel Wilson, whose family had farmed the neighboring property for generations. His unexpected appearance at this hour sent a ripple of concern through her. Samuel had been one of the few locals who'd offered genuine assistance rather than skepticism when she purchased the property. Though well into his 70s, he'd helped her clear decades of overgrowth from the yard and identify the property's boundaries. His knowledge of the area's history extended beyond official records into the oral traditions passed through generations of his family. Jessica opened the front door as Samuel climbed the porch steps, his weathered face serious in the porch light. "Evening, Jessica. Sorry to disturb you so late, but Marcus called me about what you found. Thought you should know something before you go digging further." She stepped back, inviting him into the partially renovated living room. "I don't understand. I just texted Marcus a few hours ago." Samuel settled his lanky frame onto the only finished armchair, removing his well-worn cap. "That's because Marcus knows I've been waiting for someone to find it. My grandfather told me about the passage beneath this house, made me promise to watch over it, said when the right person came to restore the Whitaker place, I'd know it was time." Jessica sat across from him, curiosity overriding her initial concern. Why keep it secret all these years? The Historical Society would have documented it. A sad smile crossed Samuel's lined face. "Some history isn't meant for official records, Jessica. Not yet. Not until the right context exists to understand it properly." He leaned forward, his voice lowering slightly. The Whitakers weren't just part of the Underground Railroad. They were keeping something else hidden down there, something people have been looking for since the war ended. "What exactly are we talking about, Samuel?" Jessica asked, her military training making her simultaneously skeptical and alert. "Letters," he replied simply. "Correspondence between Jeremiah Whitaker and President Lincoln. Dangerous letters that could have changed how Reconstruction unfolded if they'd been found." Jessica's skepticism must have shown on her face because Samuel reached into his jacket and withdrew a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age and creased from decades of careful storage. "My great-grandmother was born into slavery in Virginia. She was 14 when the Whitakers helped her escape north in 1860. Before she continued to Canada, Jeremiah showed her something, asked her to memorize a message in case he didn't survive the war. That message was passed down through my family alongside the knowledge of what lies beneath your kitchen floor." Jessica accepted the paper with careful hands, unfolding it to reveal handwriting that matched the elegant script she'd seen in Hannah Whitaker's journal. "When the third generation returns to the hearthstone, look beneath the daily bread for the nation's conscience." She looked up at Samuel, questions forming faster than she could articulate them. "Why show me this now?" Samuel's expression was solemn as he reclaimed the paper, folding it with reverence. "Because developers have been pressing the county council to approve eminent domain for this whole area, claiming historical significance doesn't outweigh economic development. What you found could establish this property's importance beyond any developer's arguments." He rose slowly, placing his cap back on his head. "Marcus will explain more tomorrow. He's spent years researching the Whitakers' connection to Lincoln. Tonight, I just wanted you to understand that what you've stumbled upon isn't just about hidden tunnels or secret passages. It's about a vision for the country that got buried, along with the men who died preserving the Union." As Samuel departed into the night, Jessica returned to her kitchen, staring at the small opening in the floor with newfound awareness. Whatever lay beneath represented more than architectural curiosity. It potentially contained historical documentation that powerful interests might prefer remain buried. She carefully replaced the loose floorboard, concealing the opening once more. If Samuel's story contained even a fragment of truth, the discovery required proper documentation and protection before being revealed. Jessica's military experience had taught her that proper intelligence gathering preceded action, a principle that seemed applicable to historical discoveries as well as combat situations. Sleep came fitfully to Jessica that night, her dreams filled with shadowy corridors and whispered conversations just beyond her hearing. She woke at dawn, the habit of early rising ingrained from her military years. While preparing her coffee, she found herself stepping carefully around the concealed opening, as though the floor might suddenly give way to reveal its secrets. By 9:30, she had already documented every inch of the exposed gap, photographing the stonework from multiple angles and sketching the layout in her project notebook. Her engineering background demanded precision. If this truly was part of the Underground Railroad, proper documentation might be crucial for historical preservation. The sound of tires on gravel announced Marcus's arrival, earlier than scheduled. Through the kitchen window, Jessica watched as he emerged from his weathered Volvo, loaded down with what appeared to be research materials. Behind him, a second vehicle pulled up, a sleek black SUV that immediately seemed out of place against the rural backdrop. From the SUV stepped a woman Jessica didn't recognize, dressed in a crisp blazer that suggested professional authority rather than casual interest. Something about the newcomer's purposeful stride triggered Jessica's instinctive caution, a sensation she hadn't experienced since leaving Afghanistan. "Morning, Jessica," Marcus called as she opened the door, his enthusiasm barely contained. "Hope you don't mind. I've brought Dr. Eleanor Rothschild from the State Historical Commission. When I saw your photo, I knew we needed her expertise." Dr. Rothschild extended her hand with practiced cordiality. "Professor Green has been quite insistent about the potential significance of your property, Ms. Harmon, particularly after your discovery yesterday." Jessica welcomed them inside, noting how Dr. Rothschild's assessing gaze swept across the renovation work, lingering on the original architectural elements Jessica had carefully preserved. The woman's expression revealed nothing, but Jessica recognized the calculated evaluation. She'd seen it in commanding officers assessing terrain before operations. "Samuel Wilson visited me last night," Jessica said as she led them toward the kitchen. "He mentioned your research into the Whitakers, Marcus, something about letters from Lincoln." Marcus and Dr. Rothschild exchanged a quick glance that confirmed Jessica's suspicion that something larger was unfolding in her kitchen. "Samuel, you shouldn't have shared that information," Dr. Rothschild said, her tone carefully neutral. "The Lincoln connection is primarily speculative at this point, though Professor Green's research has uncovered compelling circumstantial evidence." Marcus set his materials on the kitchen counter, less restrained in his response. "What Eleanor means is that without physical evidence, the historical community remains skeptical, but contemporary accounts place Lincoln in correspondence with a Maryland Quaker farmer during the critical pre-war period. The timing, geographical references, and policy implications all point to Jeremiah Whitaker." Jessica removed the floorboard covering the opening. "And you think whatever's down here might provide that physical evidence?" "It's possible," Marcus acknowledged, kneeling to examine the stonework. "The construction is consistent with known underground railroad passages. The hidden entrance beneath a kitchen floor follows a documented pattern, allowing food to be delivered to those hiding below without drawing attention from potential observers through windows." Dr. Rothschild joined him, producing a small penlight from her pocket. "The stonework is exceptional. This wasn't constructed by amateurs." She directed the light into the darkness, revealing what Jessica had already discovered: the edge of stairs descending below the foundation level. "I'd like permission to bring in ground-penetrating radar equipment," Dr. Rothschild said, straightening to face Jessica. Before anyone descends into an unstable historical structure, we should map the extent of what's below. Jessica recognized the reasonable precaution, but something in the woman's tone struck her as overly controlling. The property is still private, Dr. Rothschild. I'd like to understand exactly what we're looking for and who would have access to the findings before agreeing to official involvement. Marcus seemed surprised by her hesitation, but Dr. Rothschild's expression showed a flicker of respect. A fair question, Ms. Harmon. The Commission's interest is purely historical documentation and preservation. Any significant findings would require a collaborative approach with you as the property owner. And the developers pressuring the county for eminent domain? Jessica asked directly. Samuel mentioned they've been quite persistent. Dr. Rothschild's posture shifted subtly. I see Samuel has been quite informative. Yes, Meridian Development has submitted proposals for a commercial complex in this area. Historical designation would complicate their plans considerably. The conversation was interrupted by another vehicle approaching. Samuel's blue pickup truck. Jessica excused herself to greet him, grateful for the momentary reprieve from the tension building in her kitchen. Brought these for you, Samuel said by way of greeting, handing Jessica a rolled tube of papers. Copies of original property maps my grandfather kept shows the Whitaker farm and surrounding properties as they existed in 1860. Thought they might help you understand what's beneath your house in proper context. As they walked back to the kitchen, Samuel's expression tightened upon seeing Dr. Rothschild. Didn't expect the Commission to respond so quickly, he remarked, his usual warmth notably absent. Dr. Rothschild was just explaining the process for documenting historical findings, Jessica explained, sensing the undercurrent between them. Samuel nodded curtly. I'm sure she was. Did she mention her brother sits on Meridian Development's board of directors? The silence that followed confirmed what Jessica had intuitively sensed. Competing interests were converging around her discovery, with implications extending far beyond historical curiosity. Dr. Rothschild recovered smoothly. My family connections don't influence my professional responsibilities, Mr. Wilson. The Commission operates independently from development interests. Perhaps we should focus on the immediate question, Marcus interjected, clearly uncomfortable with the growing tension. Jessica has uncovered what appears to be an underground railroad passage. Historical documentation should be our priority before any further deterioration occurs. Jessica unrolled Samuel's maps on the counter, revealing detailed hand-drawn representations of the area's topography and property boundaries from the Civil War era. What immediately caught her attention were the subtle markings indicating what appeared to be a network of underground passages connecting several properties, including the Whitaker Homestead. These weren't just random hiding places, Jessica observed, tracing the indicated routes with her finger. This was a coordinated system spanning multiple properties. Samuel nodded. 7 families in this area worked together, creating a network that could move people safely, even when individual farms might be under observation. The Whitaker's passage was central to the operation because of the hidden room beneath the summer kitchen. Hidden room? Dr. Rothschild asked sharply, her professional demeanor momentarily slipping. The summer kitchen foundation collapsed decades ago, Samuel explained, pointing to an area behind the current house on the map, but it connected to the main house through the passage you've found. According to family stories, that's where Jeremiah kept his most important documents. The implications hung in the air between them. If Samuel's family lore was accurate, the passage might lead to historically significant documents preserved. In a space untouched for over 150 years, Jessica made her decision, balancing respect for history against her instinctive caution. I want this properly documented, but I need certain guarantees. This remains private property, and any findings will be catalogued with multiple parties present to ensure transparency. Dr. Rothschild began to object, but Marcus spoke first. That's entirely reasonable, Jessica. The discovery belongs to you as property owner. The Commission's role should be supportive rather than directive. I can have ground-penetrating radar. Here tomorrow? Dr. Rothschild conceded, though her tone suggested this compromise didn't entirely satisfy her. The results would provide structural information without disturbing the site. As they finalized arrangements, Jessica's phone chimed with a notification. A news alert from the local paper showed a proposal from Meridian Development had advanced to the final approval stage with the county council. The corporate press release specifically mentioned the historical revitalization of several properties, including lot designations that corresponded to Jessica's homestead. She showed the alert to the others, the timing too coincidental to ignore. They're accelerating their timeline. The council votes next week. Samuel's weathered face darkened. They've been buying council votes for months. If they secure approval before your historical designation is processed, then my property could be seized through eminent domain regardless of its historical significance, Jessica finished. The discovery would become their property to manage or conceal. The group moved to Jessica's work table, the dynamic shifting, as they tacitly acknowledged the need for collaborative action despite their different perspectives. Marcus spread out his research materials, which included copies of newspaper articles from the 1850s documenting Jeremiah Whitaker's public abolitionist statements and subsequent threats against his property. Whitaker wasn't just any station operator, Marcus explained. He was directly connected to Frederick Douglass through Quaker networks. His correspondence suggests he may have facilitated meetings between Douglass and Lincoln before the inauguration, meetings that influenced Lincoln's evolving position on emancipation. Dr. Rothschild, despite her family connections to the developers, appeared genuinely engaged with the historical implications. If documentary evidence exists showing Lincoln's pre-war commitment to abolition rather than just preserving the Union, it would significantly revise our understanding of his political evolution and potentially undermine certain historical narratives that have shaped policy for generations, Samuel added pointedly. Jessica, drawing on her military training in strategic assessment, recognized the immediate need to secure the site while they determined next steps. Before we bring in any equipment or additional personnel, I want to know exactly what we're dealing with. The radar can wait until we've conducted an initial exploration. Dr. Rothschild's objection was immediate. Entering an unstable historical structure without proper assessment could damage irreplaceable artifacts or prove dangerous to those exploring. I have confined space training from my military service, Jessica countered, and I suspect Samuel knows more about these passages than he's shared so far. Samuel's slight smile confirmed her assessment. My grandfather showed me parts of the network when I was a boy. Most entrances have collapsed over time, but the Whitaker passage was always the most substantially constructed. Despite Dr. Rothschild's continued protests, they prepared for a preliminary exploration. Jessica gathered necessary equipment, powerful flashlights, a basic toolkit, her phone for documentation, and safety gear from her renovation supplies. Marcus contributed acid-free gloves for handling any documents they might discover, while Samuel provided surprisingly detailed information about what to expect beneath the house. The stairs descend about 12 feet to a small chamber, he explained, sketching the layout from memory. From there, a passage runs north for approximately 30 feet before reaching the larger room beneath where the summer kitchen stood. The ceiling height varies. Jeremiah built it to accommodate a man of average height, but there are sections where support beams have lowered over time. Jessica, securing her hair beneath a bandana and checking her flashlight batteries, addressed. the unspoken concern in the room. "I understand the historical protocols, Dr. Rothschild, but this exploration has become time-sensitive. If we find something significant, I'll ensure proper authentication and preservation procedures are followed." Dr. Rothschild appeared conflicted, her professional training at odds with the accelerated timeline. Finally, she nodded. "I'll remain here to coordinate any necessary official response based on what you discover. But please document everything meticulously." With Samuel guiding and Marcus following, Jessica carefully descended the stone stairs revealed beneath her kitchen floor. The passage immediately transported her to another era, hand-cut stone walls bearing chisel marks from their original construction, and a packed earth floor worn smooth by countless footsteps from over a century before. The air was surprisingly fresh, suggesting some form of ventilation system remained partially functional. Their flashlight beams revealed construction far more sophisticated than a simple hiding place. This was thoughtfully engineered with alcoves for lanterns, subtle drainage channels to prevent flooding, and ceiling heights that, while requiring Marcus to stoop slightly, would have allowed for relatively comfortable movement. "Remarkable preservation," Marcus whispered, his historian's excitement evident despite the cramped conditions. The mortar composition appears original, no signs of modern repairs or alterations. Samuel moved with the confidence of familiarity, leading them through the underground passage. "My grandfather said over 200 freedom seekers passed through these tunnels between 1853 and 1861. Each family maintained their section, but Jeremiah coordinated the entire network. As they progressed, Jessica noticed small symbols carved into the stone at irregular intervals, simple marks that might be mistaken for natural irregularities, but formed a pattern when viewed sequentially. "Navigation markers?" she asked. Pointing her light at one such carving, Samuel nodded. "Directional guides for those moving through without escorts." The full meaning of each symbol was known only to the conductors, but together they created a map that could be followed even in complete darkness. The passage gradually widened as they approached what Samuel had described as the main chamber. Jessica's flashlight beam caught something unexpected on the earthen floor, a partial footprint that couldn't possibly be over a century old. She immediately signaled for silence, her combat instincts engaging as she examined the surrounding area more carefully. Near the chamber entrance, subtle signs indicated recent disturbance, scuff marks against the accumulated dust, and a modern candy wrapper partially concealed in a corner. Someone had discovered this passage before them, and relatively recently. Jessica motioned Marcus and Samuel closer, keeping her voice barely above a whisper. "We're not the first ones down here, not recently." She directed her flashlight toward the concerning evidence without touching anything. The partial footprint revealed the distinctive tread pattern of modern work boots, nothing like the historical disturbances one would expect in a century-old passage. Samuel's expression darkened as he examined the signs of intrusion. "Main entrance has been sealed for decades. Someone must have found another way in." His concern matched Jessica's. Unexpected access to the historical tunnels suggested their discovery wasn't as serendipitous as it had initially seemed. "Let's proceed with caution," Jessica advised, her military training surfacing in her methodical assessment of their surroundings. "Document everything exactly as we find it, but touch nothing until we understand what we're dealing with." They advanced toward the chamber entrance, Jessica leading with heightened awareness. The passage opened into a space roughly 12 feet square, its ceiling supported by hand-hewn oak beams that had blackened with age, but remained structurally sound. Unlike the earthen floor of the tunnel, this room featured carefully laid brick, giving it a more finished appearance. What immediately drew their attention were the built-in shelves along the far wall, simple plank constructions that still held an assortment of artifacts. Pottery jugs, wooden boxes, and what appeared to be bundled clothing lay covered in a century and a half of dust. But it was the small chest in the center of the room that showed clear signs of tampering, its iron latch disturbed and position shifted from the dust outline surrounding it. "Someone's been searching," Marcus whispered, his historian's reverence for undisturbed artifacts evident in his distressed tone. "Recently enough that the dust patterns haven't fully settled." Jessica circled the room's perimeter, examining the walls for additional access points that might explain how intruders had entered. Near the northwest corner, partially concealed behind a deteriorating wooden barrel, she discovered a narrow shaft ascending at an angle toward the surface. "Ventilation system," Samuel confirmed when she pointed it out. "Necessary for air circulation, and to prevent detection from smoke if those hiding needed warmth. This one likely connects to what used to be the smokehouse foundation." Jessica directed her flashlight up the shaft, noting how it had been enlarged relatively recently. Tool marks on the surrounding earth appeared fresh, and modern debris had accumulated at its base. "This is how they got in," probably discovered the vent shaft during construction work nearby and expanded it enough to access the tunnel system. The implications were concerning. If someone had been systematically exploring the underground network, they might have already discovered whatever historical artifacts the passages contained. More troubling was the question of motive. Random vandalism seemed unlikely given the remote location and specific focus on the historical chest. "We need to document the chamber quickly and determine what might have been taken," Jessica decided, removing her phone to photograph the space from multiple angles. "Samuel, does your family history mention specifically what documents were kept here?" The older man moved carefully among the artifacts, his reverence for the space evident in his deliberate movements. "My grandmother spoke of a false bottom in that chest, said Jeremiah designed it to protect the most important papers if the hideaway was discovered." Marcus, who had been examining the chest without touching it, looked up sharply. "The intruders may not have known about the hidden compartment. This style of document box often contained visible contents that would satisfy a casual search, while the real valuables remained concealed in a secondary chamber." Hope flickered as they considered this possibility. Jessica completed her photographic documentation, then approached the chest. Using her renovation gloves to minimize contamination, she carefully examined the box's exterior, noting the sophisticated craftsmanship that had preserved it through decades of underground storage. "There's a maker's mark here," she observed, pointing to a small symbol carved into the bottom corner. "Could help authenticate the period and possibly trace ownership." Marcus leaned closer, recognizing the mark immediately. "That's Isaiah Thompson's work, a free black craftsman who operated a carpentry shop in Philadelphia. He was known for creating specialized furnishings for abolitionists, often with concealed compartments for protecting sensitive documents." The chest's visible contents had clearly been disturbed. Several leather-bound journals lay askew, and what appeared to be hand-drawn maps had been unfolded and carelessly replaced. Jessica documented the disarray before carefully lifting each item for examination. "These appear to be logs of those who passed through," Marcus said, gently opening one journal to reveal columns of dates, numbers, and cryptic notations. Coded records were common practice. Names were never recorded to protect both those escaping and those assisting them. While Marcus examined the journals, Jessica focused on the chest itself, searching for the mechanism that might reveal a hidden compartment. Her engineering background proved valuable as she analyzed the box's construction, looking for inconsistencies in the wood grain or dimensions that might indicate a concealed space. "The interior dimensions don't match the exterior," she noted, measuring carefully with her pocket rule. "There's approximately 3 inches unaccounted for in the bottom section," Samuel nodded. My grandmother mentioned you had to press the corners in specific sequence, like a combination lock built into the wood itself. Jessica examined each corner joint carefully, noting subtle variations in the wood pegs securing them. These aren't just decorative. See how each one is slightly different? They're pressure points for the mechanism. With Samuel guiding from memory and Jessica applying her technical understanding, they methodically tested different corner sequences. On the sixth attempt, a soft click emanated from within the chest, and the bottom panel shifted slightly upward. It worked, Jessica whispered, carefully lifting the false bottom to reveal a hidden compartment beneath. What lay protected in that concealed space made even Marcus, with his academic reserve, gasp audibly. A leather document folio, its surface stamped with the presidential seal, contained what appeared to be a stack of letters. Beside it lay a small, leather-bound journal with JW embossed on its cover, and most surprisingly, a miniature daguerreotype in a protective case. We need to document this exactly as found before anything is moved, Marcus insisted, his historian's training asserting itself despite his obvious excitement. Jessica took detailed photographs from multiple angles while he narrated the precise position and condition of each item. Only after comprehensive documentation did Marcus carefully lift the presidential folio, using the acid-free gloves he'd brought. With painstaking care, he opened the leather binding to reveal its contents. Approximately 15 letters, their paper remarkably preserved in the stable underground environment. The faded handwriting on the topmost letter was immediately distinctive, and the signature at the bottom removed any doubt about its authenticity. Abraham Lincoln, Marcus confirmed, his voice scarcely above a whisper, dated September 1860, just before the election. Jessica and Samuel leaned closer as Marcus gently lifted the letter to reveal those beneath it. A correspondence spanning from 1859 through early 1865, each bearing the same distinctive signature. The implications were staggering. A previously undiscovered cache of presidential correspondence preserved in its original hiding place. We need to get these to safety immediately, Jessica decided, the footprints and signs of intrusion taking on greater significance with the confirmation of the chamber's historical treasure. If someone knows these are here, they'll return. Samuel nodded in agreement. Too valuable to leave unprotected, both historically and, he hesitated, politically. That single word captured the gravity of their discovery. Presidential correspondence from the Civil War era could potentially alter historical narratives that had shaped national understanding for generations. Depending on their contents, these letters might represent not just academic interest, but politically sensitive revelations about Lincoln's true positions and promises. Dr. Rothschild needs to see these, Marcus began, but Jessica raised a hand to pause him. Let's consider our next steps carefully, she advised. Remember, her family connection to the developers creates a potential conflict of interest. We need independent authentication and proper security before this becomes widely known. They carefully replaced the documents in their protective folio, securing the chest's hidden compartment before preparing to exit the chamber. Jessica's instincts kept her vigilant as they retraced their steps through the underground passage, conscious that whoever had accessed the tunnels previously might return at any time. Upon emerging into her kitchen, they found Dr. Rothschild, engaged in a tense phone conversation that she quickly terminated upon seeing them. "You've been down there nearly an hour," she noted, her professional composure slightly strained. "Did you find anything significant?" The carefully neutral phrasing didn't mask her intense interest, and Jessica made a split-second decision based on her assessment of the complex dynamics at play. "We found evidence of recent intrusion," she replied truthfully. "Someone accessed the tunnels through a ventilation shaft that connects to the old smokehouse foundation. They disturbed several artifacts, but we need expert assessment to determine what might be missing. It wasn't a direct lie, but her deliberate omission of the presidential correspondence bought them time to secure the most historically significant finds. Marcus's brief expression of surprise quickly smoothed into understanding as he followed Jessica's lead. "The tunnel system is remarkably preserved," he added, focusing on architectural details rather than contents. "Definitely consistent with underground railroad construction methods. The historical designation application can proceed based on the structural evidence alone." Dr. Rothschild's gaze sharpened with suspicion at their carefully curated responses. "No document caches. Family records? Anything written that might confirm the property's historical usage?" "Some coded logbooks," Samuel offered, providing just enough truth to sound forthcoming. "Nothing immediately decipherable without scholarly analysis." Jessica redirected the conversation to practical next steps. "The evidence of recent access concerns me from a preservation standpoint. We should secure the entrance properly and consider surveillance until formal archaeological assessment can begin." This practical concern provided legitimate grounds for accelerating the site's protection without revealing the true magnitude of their discovery. Dr. Rothschild reluctantly agreed, making notes for her official report while Jessica outlined a security plan for the property. "I'll expedite the historical designation paperwork," Dr. Rothschild promised as she prepared to leave, "though I must note that proper procedure would have involved the commission before any exploration occurred." After her departure, an uncomfortable silence filled the kitchen until they were certain her vehicle had left the property. Only then did Marcus exhale heavily, running a hand through his graying hair. "You didn't tell her about the Lincoln letters," he stated, not a question, but a recognition of Jessica's tactical decision. "Not yet," Jessica confirmed, retrieving the document folio they had carefully concealed inside her tool bag before emerging from the tunnel. "Something doesn't add up. The timing of the development proposal, her immediate involvement, the evidence someone's already been searching the tunnels. I want independent authentication before these become publicly known." Samuel nodded his approval. "Wise precaution. Those letters could significantly impact the historical narrative around Lincoln and his true intentions regarding emancipation. Powerful interests might prefer certain perspectives remain unchallenged." "Who can we trust for authentication without exposing the discovery prematurely?" Jessica asked, directing the question to Marcus, whose academic connections offered their best resource. The professor considered carefully. "I have a colleague at Georgetown, Dr. Abigail Porter. She's the leading expert on Civil War-era documentation and has specialized equipment for non-invasive analysis. More importantly, she has no connection to development interests or the U.S. state historical apparatus." "Can she come here?" Jessica asked, reluctant to transport the fragile documents. Marcus shook his head. "Her authentication equipment isn't portable, but I trust her implicitly. We could document the chain of custody and transport everything with proper archival protection." Jessica considered their limited options, the pressure of time working against them. The county council would vote on the development proposal in less than a week, potentially putting the entire property at risk of eminent domain seizure if they couldn't establish its exceptional historical significance beforehand. "There's something else to consider," Samuel interjected quietly. "My family has protected the knowledge of these tunnels for generations because of what they represent beyond physical history. They're evidence of ordinary people choosing moral action despite personal risk, a legacy worth more than just the documentation it preserved." His words resonated with Jessica's own motivations for purchasing the homestead, not just as a renovation project or potential investment, but as a tangible connection to American history that deserved preservation. The hidden passages beneath her kitchen floor represented the physical manifestation of moral courage, of individuals creating literal underground pathways toward freedom when official channels failed. "We'll take the letters to your colleague tomorrow," Jessica decided, addressing Marcus while beginning to prepare proper storage for overnight protection. "But first, I want to thoroughly document everything we found and secure the tunnel entrance. If someone has been searching the network, they might return, especially if they suspect they missed something important." As evening approached, they carefully photographed each letter without fully unfolding the fragile paper, capturing the presidential seals, dates, and Lincoln's distinctive signatures. Jessica's military precision proved valuable as she created detailed documentation of their discovery, establishing a clear timeline and chain of custody that would stand up to future scrutiny. Samuel contributed his family's oral history, which Marcus recorded as supporting contextual evidence. The connections between the physical evidence, historical records, and generational knowledge created a compelling case for the site's extraordinary significance. After Samuel and Marcus departed, the professor taking the securely packaged documents for safekeeping overnight before their Georgetown trip, Jessica remained alone in the old farmhouse, its historical weight now palpable in a way it hadn't been before. She checked the reinforced covering she'd installed over the tunnel entrance, then completed a thorough security sweep of the property. The discovery had transformed her renovation project into something far more significant, connecting her not just to the physical structure, but to the moral legacy it represented. As night settled over the rural Maryland landscape, Jessica sat at her work table reviewing the photographs they'd taken, her thoughts turning to the generations of individuals who had risked everything for their convictions. From Jeremiah Whitaker creating hidden passages beneath his home, to Samuel's ancestors preserving crucial historical knowledge through oral tradition, to her own decision to protect these discoveries until they could be properly authenticated. Each represented a choice to safeguard truth against those who might prefer it remain buried. The homestead she'd purchased as a renovation project had become something far more, a physical connection to America's complex moral history and a responsibility to ensure that long-silenced voices finally had their chance to be heard. Dawn found Jessica already awake, reviewing security footage from the motion-activated cameras. She'd installed around the property perimeter after everyone departed. Her military habit of thorough preparation had proven valuable. During the night, a dark SUV had passed slowly by her driveway twice, headlights extinguished on the second pass. The vehicle never turned in, but its deliberate reconnaissance pattern triggered her well-honed sense for surveillance. She texted Marcus with a simple message: "Proceed with caution, property under observation overnight." His reply came quickly, confirming their Georgetown appointment with Dr. Porter at 11 and suggesting an alternate meeting location to avoid being followed. Jessica spent the early morning implementing additional security measures. She installed battery-operated contact sensors on all access points to the tunnel entrance, connecting them to an alert system on her phone. The renovation supplies provided perfect cover for purchasing construction-grade security equipment without raising suspicions. Just another homeowner protecting valuable tools from rural theft. By 8 o'clock, she had completed necessary preparations and was reviewing the historical material they'd discovered. The daguerreotype from the hidden compartment particularly captured her attention. It showed a distinguished black man in formal attire standing beside a seated Jeremiah Whitaker, their posture suggesting a relationship of mutual respect rather than the hierarchical positioning common in period photography. Her phone rang, a Baltimore number she didn't recognize. Caution made her let it go to voicemail, but the message left her unsettled. "Ms. Harmon, this is Councilman Edwards from the County Planning Commission. I understand you've been working with the Historical Society regarding your property. I'd appreciate a conversation about the Meridian development proposal affecting your area. Please call my office today. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Jessica had filed no official reports about her discovery, yet somehow the local government had taken sudden interest in her historical research. Either Dr. Rothschild had shared information despite her professional obligations, or someone involved with the unauthorized tunnel access had connections to the council. She texted Samuel about the concerning development. His response confirmed her suspicions. Edwards is Meridian's primary supporter on the council, takes significant campaign contributions from development interests. Jessica gathered her documentation and the journal they'd discovered alongside the presidential correspondence. The pre-arranged meeting with Marcus was scheduled for 10, a small cafe in Frederick, about 30 minutes from her property, chosen for its public setting and multiple exit points. Before leaving, she activated all security measures and locked the reinforced cover over the tunnel entrance. On impulse, she photographed the mysterious daguerreotype and tucked the original into her pocket rather than leaving it secured at the house. If the property was compromised during her absence, at least this piece of historical evidence would remain protected. The drive to Frederick required vigilance. Jessica took a circuitous route, employing counter-surveillance techniques from her military training to identify any potential tails. She parked 3 blocks from the cafe, approaching on foot with constant awareness of her surroundings. The hypervigilance felt familiar, a skill set she'd hoped to leave behind in Afghanistan, but now proved valuable in rural Maryland. Marcus waited at a corner table, a leather portfolio case beside him, containing the presidential correspondence they'd discovered. He looked up with evident relief when Jessica slid into the seat across from him. "Any problems?" she asked quietly, scanning the cafe's other occupants with practiced casualness. "Nothing obvious," he replied, "though I took precautions as you suggested. Varied my route, watched for followers." He pushed a newspaper across the table, folded to highlight a small article on the lower corner of the local section. This appeared in today's edition. The headline read, "Historical discovery could delay development." The brief text mentioned an unnamed source from the State Historical Commission reporting potential underground railroad evidence at a property within Meridian's proposed development zone. "Someone's trying to control the narrative," Jessica observed, establishing public knowledge of a discovery while minimizing its significance, just enough to acknowledge historical findings without suggesting they merit halting the development. Marcus nodded grimly. "Creating context where our discovery appears expected and manageable rather than extraordinary. Dr. Porter is concerned enough that she's meeting us privately rather than at her university office." Jessica shared the information about Councilman Edwards' call and the overnight surveillance. The pattern suggested coordinated interest from multiple quarters, political, developmental, and historical, converging around their discovery with unusual speed. "The letters must be more significant than we initially realized," she concluded. "Someone suspects what we found and is positioning to control access to the information." They left separately, reconnecting at a bookstore parking lot where Marcus had left his car. From there, they traveled together to Georgetown University's historic campus, following Dr. Porter's instructions to use a service entrance to the conservation building rather than the main academic access. Dr. Abigail Porter met them personally, escorting them through a security checkpoint with pre-arranged clearance. The professor was younger than Jessica had expected, perhaps early 40s, with protective gloves already on her hands in anticipation of examining the documents. "Marcus has shared the basic circumstances of your discovery," she said, leading them into a laboratory equipped with specialized imaging equipment, though he was appropriately circumspect about specifics over the phone. The conservation lab provided a secure environment for examining the letters, climate-controlled, with specialized lighting and handling equipment designed for fragile, historical documents. Dr. Porter's expertise became immediately apparent as she organized her analysis approach. "I'll begin with non-invasive authentication," she explained, preparing a multispectral imaging system. This allows examination of paper composition, ink chemical properties, and underlying drafts or alterations without physically testing the materials, Jessica and Marcus observed as Dr. Porter carefully transferred each letter to the examination surface, her movements precise and practiced. The first letter, dated September 1860, underwent comprehensive analysis, with Porter occasionally murmuring observations to her digital recorder. Period consistent rag paper, iron gall ink, showing appropriate oxidation patterns, watermark matches known 1850s government stationery. Her running commentary built a compelling case for authenticity even before she examined the content. When she finally turned to the handwriting analysis, her professional demeanor briefly cracked. "This is unquestionably Lincoln's hand. I've worked with confirmed Lincoln documents extensively. The distinctive pressure patterns, letter formation, and signature characteristics are consistent with authenticated correspondence from the pre-presidential period." She looked up at them, the significance of the discovery evident in her expression. "What you've found appears to be genuinely extraordinary. A previously unknown correspondence cache between Lincoln and a private citizen spanning from before his election through nearly the end of his presidency." The authentication process continued methodically, with each letter undergoing the same rigorous examination. As the content became clearer through Porter's analysis, the historical significance of the collection grew increasingly apparent. "These aren't merely personal correspondence," Porter noted, carefully examining the third letter in the sequence. "Lincoln is discussing his evolving thoughts on emancipation in explicit terms that contradict some of his public positions from the same period. He's writing to someone he clearly trusts with his private considerations on the nation's most divisive issue." The letter, dated January 1861, written during the critical transition period before Lincoln's inauguration, contained particularly striking passages that Porter read aloud. "Though political necessity constrains my public position to preservation of the Union above all matters, I confide in you my growing conviction that no lasting union can exist while the institution of slavery remains. The moral question must eventually supersede the constitutional one, though the timing of this transformation requires careful consideration." Jessica and Marcus exchanged glances, recognizing the historical implications. Lincoln's public statements during this period had emphasized preserving the Union rather than abolishing slavery, a position that allowed him to maintain critical border state support during the war's early phases. Lincoln strategically presented different priorities to different audiences, Porter explained, examining subsequent letters. "These private writings to Whitaker reveal his true North Star was emancipation far earlier than most historical accounts suggest, though he recognized the political impossibility of stating this openly while trying to prevent Southern secession." As they progressed through the correspondence chronologically, a compelling narrative emerged. Lincoln had maintained this private channel with Jeremiah Whitaker, using the Quaker farmers' Underground Railroad connections to gather intelligence about conditions in the South and to discreetly communicate with abolitionist leaders who couldn't be publicly associated with the presidency. The most historically significant letter, dated September 1862, preceded the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation by just 2 weeks. In it, Lincoln outlined his intentions and concerns with remarkable candor. The proclamation, limited though it must be by military necessity and constitutional constraints, represents my first public step toward the universal freedom I have long privately championed. I harbor no illusions that legal declarations alone secure liberty. The pathways your community has established prove the necessity of direct action alongside official measures. Porter looked up from the document, her expression reflecting the weight of the discovery. This directly challenges the conventional narrative that Lincoln evolved gradually toward emancipation, primarily through political and military calculation. These letters suggest his commitment was deeply personal and predated his presidency, with the timing of public actions reflecting strategic considerations rather than evolving convictions. As Porter completed her authentication process, she provided preliminary conservation recommendations while preparing detailed documentation. These need proper archival storage immediately. The stable underground environment preserved them remarkably well, but exposure to changing humidity and light will accelerate deterioration. The question of what to do with the authenticated letters loomed large. Their historical significance was now beyond doubt, but the immediate practical concerns remained, preventing the imminent development. A project from destroying the historical site while ensuring the letters received proper scholarly attention and public accessibility. There's another dimension to consider, Porter added, carefully returning the letters to temporary archival sleeves. These documents potentially affect institutional narratives that have shaped national understanding for generations. Various interests might prefer controlling access to such revelations rather than allowing unfiltered public examination. Jessica recognized the academic understatement covering a practical warning. You're saying powerful people might want these suppressed or contextualized in particular ways. Porter nodded cautiously. Historical narratives serve contemporary purposes. Documents that complicate established understandings often face institutional resistance, not conspiracy necessarily, but systemic inertia and protection of vested interpretations. The conservation analysis complete, they faced the immediate decision of where the letters should be secured. Marcus had initially suggested university archives, but the growing pattern of interest in their discovery suggested institutional protection might come with unwanted oversight and potential restrictions. I know someone at the National Archives who handles sensitive historical acquisitions, Porter offered. She could arrange secure temporary storage while establishing provenance without premature public announcement. This would protect the documents physically while you resolve the property situation. Jessica considered this option, weighing security concerns against transparency needs. The development vote happens in 5 days. We need to establish the historical significance officially. Before then, but without surrendering control of the narrative, Porter's solution provided a pragmatic middle path. I can prepare a preliminary authentication report today, officially confirming period-consistent materials and Lincoln's handwriting, without detailing the full content. This provides documented historical significance for your preservation. Claim while buying time for proper scholarly assessment. As they carefully packed the precious documents for transport to Porter's secure university storage, Jessica received another call from Councilman Edwards. She let it go to voicemail again, but his message carried a distinctly different tone from the morning's call. Ms. Harmon, I understand you've been exploring historical features on your property without proper permits or supervision. The county has responsibility to ensure safety and preservation standards for potential historical sites. Expect a visit from code enforcement this afternoon. The thinly veiled threat confirmed their concerns. Someone was attempting to establish governmental control over the site before the full significance of their discovery became publicly known. The timing suggested information was flowing between Dr. Rothschild, development interests, and county officials with concerning coordination. They're moving faster than we anticipated, Jessica told Marcus as they left the conservation lab, using code enforcement to gain legal access to the property while we're absent. Marcus checked his watch with growing concern. We won't make it back before they arrive. Does anyone else have access to your property? Samuel, Jessica realized, immediately calling the elderly neighbor. His phone went straight to voicemail, increasing her concern. We need to get back there immediately. They parted from Dr. Porter with arrangements to reconnect later that day about the authentication report. The drive back to Coopersville became a race against uncertain opposition. Jessica's military training had taught her to anticipate worst-case scenarios. If county officials gained access to her property during her absence, the tunnel entrance could be discovered, documented, and potentially seized under historical preservation statutes before she could establish legal protection for her discovery. As they approached the rural roads leading to her property, Jessica spotted Samuel's blue pickup parked at the intersection, the elderly man leaning against its hood, clearly waiting for them. She pulled alongside, rolling down her window. "Don't go directly to the house," Samuel warned without preamble. "County vehicles arrived about an hour ago. 4 men in official jackets with equipment. I told them you were out of town until tomorrow, but they're waiting on the property, claiming emergency historical preservation authority." Jessica processed this development quickly, formulating a response that balanced legal requirements against protection of their discovery. "Did they enter the house?" Samuel shook his head. "Not yet. Said they need to document the site's condition before potential historical designation. They're parked out front, apparently waiting for someone else to arrive before proceeding." Tactical situation required immediate response. Jessica made a quick decision, directing Marcus to follow a back-access road that approached her property through adjacent farmland. "Samuel, can you keep them occupied for another 30 minutes? Ask questions about the development proposal, request identification, anything to buy us time." The elderly man nodded with unexpected eagerness. "Been dealing with government overreach for 70 years. Think I can manage a bit of bureaucratic delay." As Samuel returned to the main road, Jessica led Marcus along the barely visible farm track that approached her property from behind. Her strategic foresight in exploring all access routes during her first weeks of ownership now proved invaluable. "We need to secure additional evidence from the tunnel before they gain access," she explained, as they parked behind a small equipment shed at the property's rear boundary. "Dr. Porter's authentication provides academic validation, but we need irrefutable public evidence of the site's historical significance." Staying low and using outbuildings for cover, they approached the farmhouse undetected. Through the kitchen window, Jessica could see the county vehicles parked in her front drive, officials consulting documents while apparently waiting for additional authority to enter without her presence. They slipped in through the rarely used back entrance, moving silently toward the kitchen where the tunnel access remained concealed beneath the reinforced covering she'd installed. Jessica worked quickly, removing the protective barrier while Marcus kept watch. "What exactly are we looking for?" he whispered as she prepared to descend. Hannah Whitaker's journal mentioned a hidden compartment in the main chamber wall, separate from the document chest, Jessica explained, gathering necessary tools. "If we found Lincoln's side of the correspondence, there might be draft copies of Jeremiah's replies that provide additional context." Time pressure made their descent into the tunnel more hurried than their previous exploration. Jessica led, with focused determination, bypassing the main passage to return directly to the underground chamber where they'd discovered the presidential correspondence. The room appeared unchanged since their previous visit, the document chest still positioned where they'd left it after removing the Lincoln letters. Jessica moved immediately to the wall Hannah's journal had referenced, a section where the stonework patterns subtly differed from the surrounding construction. "Look for inconsistencies in the mortar pattern," she instructed Marcus, running her fingers along the wall seams with methodical precision. According to the journal, the hidden compartment was designed to be invisible unless you knew exactly where to apply pressure. Their search acquired urgency as muffled voices became audible from above, Samuel's distinctive rural drawl responding to more authoritative tones. Jessica's fingers detected a subtle difference in one mortar joint, a slight give that contrasted with the solid construction surrounding it. Applying firm pressure to the adjacent stones in sequence, she felt a mechanism release within the wall. A section of stonework approximately 18 inches square pivoted inward, revealing a cavity containing a metal document box, smaller than the chest they'd previously examined, but of similar period craftsmanship. Unlike the larger chest, this container showed no signs of recent disturbance. The fine layer of historic dust remained undisturbed across its surface. Whoever searched this chamber didn't find this hiding spot, Marcus whispered, his historians' excitement barely contained despite their precarious situation. This could be completely untouched since the Civil War. Jessica carefully removed the box, its weight suggesting significant contents. The simple latch, unlike the complex mechanism of the larger chest, opened without resistance. Inside, they found several bound packets of documents, each wrapped in oilcloth that had preserved them remarkably well in the stable underground environment. The first packet contained what appeared to be draft letters in a flowing handwriting, distinct from Lincoln's more angular script, presumably Jeremiah Whitaker's copies of his responses to the president. More surprising was the second bundle, which contained what appeared to be military dispatches and hand-drawn maps of Confederate positions along the Maryland-Virginia border. Intelligence reports, Jessica observed, her military background allowing immediate recognition of their tactical nature. Whitaker wasn't just corresponding with Lincoln about moral philosophies. He was providing actionable military intelligence gathered through underground railroad networks. The third packet proved most historically significant, a handwritten manifesto titled A True Emancipation, Proposals for the Post-War Reconstruction. The document, dated January 1865, contained detailed recommendations for land redistribution, educational systems, and political representation for formerly enslaved populations, policies far more progressive than those ultimately implemented after Lincoln's assassination. Margin notes in Lincoln's distinctive handwriting suggested active collaboration on these proposals during the war's final months. One notation particularly stood out. Implementation must begin immediately upon conclusion of hostilities. Delay invites entrenchment of old systems under new names. This is extraordinary, Marcus breathed, carefully examining the document's pages. It suggests Lincoln was planning a significantly more progressive reconstruction than history records, closer to what radical Republicans advocated after his death. The final item in the metal box wasn't a document at all, but a small leather pouch containing a gold pocket watch. An inscription inside the case read, "To J.W., for your steadfast moral compass when the nation lost its way. A.L. 1864." The personal nature of the gift emphasized the depth of connection between the president and the Quaker farmer, not merely a political alliance, but a friendship based on shared moral vision despite their different stations. We need to document everything quickly, Jessica decided, hearing the voices above growing more insistent. She used her phone to photograph each document in sequence, creating a digital record of their discovery before carefully repacking the metal box. "What about the box itself?" Marcus asked as she secured the hidden compartment, returning the wall to its seamless appearance. "We take it with us," she decided. "These documents need the same authentication process as the letters. More importantly, their existence proves the historical significance extends beyond the previously discovered correspondence." They ascended from the tunnel, Jessica replacing the concealed entrance covering and disguising recent disturbance with renovation materials. Through the window, she could see Samuel still engaged in animated conversation with the county officials. Though their body language suggested growing impatience with his delaying tactics. "We'll use the same rear exit," Jessica whispered, securing the newly discovered document box in her backpack. "My truck is hidden behind the equipment shed. Once we're clear, I'll contact Dr. Porter to arrange immediate authentication of these additional materials." Marcus hesitated, glancing toward the officials visible through the window. "Shouldn't we confront them directly? Present what we've found and force official recognition?" Jessica shook her head. "Not yet. Their unexpected arrival with dubious authority suggests they're operating on behalf of interests that wanted access before we returned. We need independent authentication before engaging with potentially compromised officials." They slipped out the back entrance undetected, using outbuildings as cover while retreating to Jessica's concealed vehicle. As they prepared to depart via the unmarked access road, Jessica texted Samuel, "Clear, thank you. We'll contact soon." The elderly farmer's barely perceptible nod toward the direction of their hidden position confirmed he'd received the message. Once, safely beyond the property boundaries, Jessica pulled onto a secondary road that would allow them to circle back toward town without passing the main entrance to her homestead. The document box secured between them represented another piece of the extraordinary historical puzzle they were assembling, one with implications beyond academic interest. "We need to accelerate our timeline," Jessica said as they drove, processing the tactical situation with military efficiency. The coordination between local officials and development interests suggests they're aware something significant has been discovered, even if they don't know exactly what. Marcus nodded, making notes of the additional documents they'd recovered. "Dr. Porter's preliminary authentication report will be ready this afternoon. With these additional materials, we can file an emergency historical designation application with federal authorities rather than relying solely on state-level protection." The discovery of military intelligence documents added a national security dimension to their historical find, potentially invoking federal protection protocols that superseded local development authorities. Jessica recognized this leverage immediately, though using it required careful documentation and appropriate institutional contacts. "We need a secure location to examine these new materials properly," she decided, considering their limited options. "Returning to my property isn't safe until we understand exactly what authority those officials are claiming," Marcus suggested. His university office is a temporary secure location, but Jessica's threat assessment flagged potential risks. If Dr. Rothschild had already breached professional protocols by sharing information with development interests or local officials, academic environments might have similarly compromised security. The solution came from an unexpected direction. Samuel called as they were considering options, his voice carrying the practical wisdom of someone accustomed to outmaneuvering bureaucratic interference. "Those county fellows left after about 20 minutes of me questioning their authority," he reported with evident satisfaction. "Said they'd return with proper documentation tomorrow. More importantly, I've been thinking about secure locations. My family has protected Whitaker secrets for generations. Might be time to show you where we kept our own historical records." Samuel directed them to a location several miles from Jessica's property, a modest farmhouse situated on what remained of his family's once extensive agricultural holdings. Unlike Jessica's historic homestead, Samuel's residence had been rebuilt. In the 1940s, its modern appearance offering no obvious historical significance to casual observers. "My grandfather insisted on one historical element when they rebuilt after the fire," Samuel explained, leading them to what appeared to be a standard root cellar entrance behind the house. The foundation of the original cabin was preserved, intact beneath the new construction. The root cellar extended beyond initial appearances, its rear wall concealing an entrance to a much older structure. the stone foundation of the original Wilson family cabin, dating to the early 1800s. Within this preserved historical space, Samuel had maintained a small but comprehensive archive of local Underground Railroad documentation. "My family wasn't directly involved in operating the network," he explained, revealing carefully preserved journals, maps, and photographs organized chronologically on built-in shelves. "But we were record keepers. When Whitaker and others feared their stations might be discovered, copies of critical documentation were distributed among trusted families for safekeeping." The existence of this private archive, maintained across generations outside official historical institutions, explained how knowledge of the tunnel system had persisted despite remaining absent from public historical records. More importantly, it provided a secure location for examining their new discoveries, away from institutional oversight or official interference. As they settled in the improvised research space, Dr. Porter called with an update on the Lincoln letters they'd delivered earlier. Her authentication was progressing rapidly, with preliminary findings confirming both material authenticity and historical significance beyond initial estimates. The correspondence contains explicit discussion of emancipation strategy that significantly predates Lincoln's public positions, she reported. Most notably, several letters outline specific plans for land redistribution and political rights for formerly enslaved people that never appeared in official Reconstruction policies after his assassination. This aligned perfectly with the newly discovered manifesto from Whitaker's hidden document cache, suggesting a coordinated vision for post-war Reconstruction that was far more progressive than what history recorded. The potential historical implications were profound, evidence that Lincoln's assassination had derailed specific plans for a more equitable post-war society rather than merely altering the general approach to Reconstruction. "I've prepared the preliminary authentication report as promised," Porter continued. "It confirms period-appropriate materials and Lincoln's handwriting without detailing specific content. This provides official documentation of extraordinary historical significance, while protecting the full implications until proper scholarly assessment can occur." Jessica updated Porter about their additional discoveries and the concerning pattern of official interest in her property. The conservation specialist's response reflected growing professional concern about potential interference with historical materials. This level of coordination suggests awareness of the discovery's significance, Porter observed. "I've expedited the authentication process and contacted my National Archives connection about emergency preservation protocols. The military intelligence dimension potentially qualifies these materials for immediate federal protection." While Jessica coordinated these security measures, Marcus and Samuel examined the newly discovered documents in detail, cross-referencing them with Samuel's family archives to establish broader historical context. The interrelationships between various local families involved in Underground Railroad operations emerged more clearly, revealing a sophisticated network of cooperation that extended beyond what conventional historical accounts had documented. Whitaker's position was more central than even local histories recognized, Marcus noted, mapping the connections evident in the documents. His Quaker connections provided moral authority, while his farm's strategic location offered practical advantages for moving people northward. But it was his direct communication channel with Lincoln that made his operation uniquely significant. The most historically revelatory documents proved to be the draft Reconstruction proposals. Unlike Lincoln's public statements, which emphasized reconciliation and relatively moderate approaches to post-war Southern reintegration, these private working documents outlined specific mechanisms for land redistribution, educational guarantees, and political representation that would have fundamentally altered power structures in the post-war South. Look at this section, Marcus indicated, carefully turning pages of the manifesto. Specific provisions for allocating abandoned plantation lands to formerly enslaved families, with government-backed loans for equipment and supplies. This goes far beyond the 40 acres and a mule concept that's entered historical memory. It's a comprehensive economic empowerment program. Another section outlined educational requirements that would have established federally funded schools throughout the South, with explicit protections ensuring equal access regardless of race. Margin notes in Lincoln's hand suggested constitutional justifications for such measures under war powers, anticipating and countering the legal objections that would eventually undermine actual Reconstruction efforts. This wasn't just aspirational philosophy, Jessica observed, her pragmatic assessment focusing on implementation details. These are operational plans with specific funding mechanisms, legal frameworks, and enforcement provisions. They were preparing for immediate implementation following Confederate surrender. As they continued examining these extraordinary materials, Jessica received an email from Dr. Porter containing the promised preliminary authentication report. The carefully worded document confirmed the Lincoln letters' authenticity while establishing their exceptional historical significance without revealing specific content that might prove politically sensitive. This report gives us legitimate grounds for emergency historical designation, Jessica noted, immediately forwarding the document to Marcus's university email for backup. We need to file the application before the county council vote on the development proposal. The pressing question of where to secure the physical documents remained. Dr. Porter had arranged temporary secure storage at Georgetown University for the Lincoln letters they'd already delivered, but the additional materials presented both opportunity and risk. Consolidating all discoveries in one location offered practical advantages for research and authentication, but potentially created a single point of vulnerability if institutional pressures emerged. Samuel offered an alternative perspective shaped by generations of protecting hidden history. My family preserved these records independently for over 150 years because institutions change with political winds. Maybe the answer isn't immediately surrendering everything to official archives. His suggestion carried wisdom that resonated with Jessica's military experience. Distributing resources offered tactical advantages against opponents with unknown capabilities and intentions. We create verifiable documentation of everything, she proposed, but maintain distributed physical possession until proper independent authentication and protection can be guaranteed. This approach balanced scholarly responsibility with practical security concerns. Digital documentation would ensure the historical information survived regardless of what happened to physical materials, while careful authentication through trusted academic channels would establish legitimacy without immediate institutional control. As evening approached, Jessica developed a strategic plan addressing both immediate and longer-term considerations. The emergency historical designation application would proceed immediately using Dr. Porter's authentication report and carefully selected evidence from their discoveries. This provided legitimate protection for the physical site while buying time for comprehensive assessment of the document's contents and implications. For the physical materials, they established a temporary distributed security approach. The Lincoln letters would remain in Dr. Porter's university secure storage, while the newly discovered document box would stay in Samuel's family archive temporarily. Digital documentation of all materials would be securely backed up in multiple locations, ensuring the historical information couldn't be effectively suppressed regardless of what happened to individual artifacts. Jessica's phone chimed with another voicemail notification. Councilman Edwards again, his tone now openly threatening. Ms. Harmon, your obstruction of county historical assessment violates multiple ordinances. The council has scheduled an emergency session tomorrow regarding immediate protective action for suspected historical assets on your property. Your presence is strongly advised if you wish to maintain any control over the proceedings. The accelerated timeline confirmed their suspicions about coordinated efforts to establish official control over the discovery. The emergency council session represented both threat and opportunity, a public forum where revealing select information about their discoveries might generate sufficient public interest to prevent quiet bureaucratic seizure. We need to control the initial narrative, Jessica decided, military strategy informing her approach to information management. Reveal enough to establish irrefutable historical significance while protecting the most sensitive aspects until proper independent. Assessment is complete. As night settled over rural Maryland, Jessica, Marcus, and Samuel finalized their strategy for the following day's confrontation. The documents they'd discovered represented not just academic historical interest, but a potentially transformative reassessment of a pivotal moment in American history. The stakes extended beyond property rights or local development. They touched fundamental national narratives about Reconstruction, racial justice, and the interrupted possibilities of post-Civil War transformation. In Samuel's preserved historical space, surrounded by generations of carefully maintained records, Jessica reflected on how her search for a simple renovation project had led to this extraordinary responsibility. The homestead she'd purchased as a fresh start had connected her to something far larger, a hidden history waiting for the right moment to emerge from beneath weathered floorboards and behind stone walls, carrying truths as relevant to present challenges as to past understanding. Morning arrived with Jessica already methodically organizing their presentation materials for the emergency council session. She had remained at Samuel's farmhouse overnight, their collective concern about potential surveillance or unauthorized entry at her property justifying the precaution. Her military background had trained her to prepare for high-stakes engagements with the same disciplined approach she had once applied to combat operations. Thorough intelligence assessment, strategic objective identification, and tactical resource allocation. Select disclosure is our strongest position, she explained to Marcus and Samuel as they reviewed the materials they would present. We need to establish irrefutable historical significance without revealing everything we've discovered until proper protections are in place. Marcus, who had spent most of the night organizing the historical documentation into a compelling narrative, nodded in agreement. I've structured the presentation to focus on the Underground Railroad structural evidence first. That alone justifies historical preservation. We introduce the Lincoln connection only after establishing the property's inherent historical value. Their careful preparations were interrupted by a call from Dr. Porter, whose authentication work had continued through the night with assistance from trusted colleagues at Georgetown. Her voice carried both excitement and concern as she shared significant developments. We completed preliminary analysis of the Lincoln letter's content, she reported. The historical implications are even more significant than initially assessed. Lincoln explicitly discusses contingency plans should his administration be prematurely concluded. His awareness of assassination risk was apparently acute, particularly after proposing more progressive Reconstruction approaches. This revelation added urgency to their already time-sensitive situation. If Lincoln had anticipated potential opposition to his Reconstruction plans becoming violent, the documents they discovered represented not just historical footnotes, but a deliberately preserved alternative vision for post-war America, one intentionally hidden from those who might suppress it following his death. There's something else, Porter continued, her academic caution evident in her measured tone. We've identified references to additional document caches in at least 2 other locations. Apparently, Whitaker wasn't the only correspondent maintaining evidence of Lincoln's private commitments regarding reconstruction. The letters mention a network of trusted allies preserving documentation against what Lincoln termed the contingency of historical revision. This information transformed their understanding of what they'd discovered. The Whitaker Homestead represented not an isolated historical curiosity, but potentially one node in a deliberately established network designed to preserve evidence of Lincoln's true intentions against posthumous reinterpretation. The stakes for preservation extended beyond a single property to an interconnected historical record that had remained hidden for over 150 years. The council meeting becomes even more crucial, Jessica noted, immediately integrating this new information into their strategy. We're not just protecting a single historical site, but potentially the first access point to a broader historical record that could fundamentally revise our understanding of the post-Civil War period. As they finalized their preparations, Samuel contributed crucial local context that would strengthen their position. The development company hasn't just been pursuing this project. They've systematically acquired properties throughout the county with similar historical profiles. 3 former Underground Railroad sites have been demolished for commercial development in the past decade, all after cursory historical assessment declared them insignificant. This pattern suggested not random economic development, but potentially deliberate targeting of properties that might contain similar historical evidence. Whether driven by practical development interests or more concerning motivations to control historical narratives, the pattern reinforced the importance of establishing public awareness of their discovery's significance. They arrived at the county administration building 30 minutes before the scheduled emergency session, a strategic choice allowing them to observe who else attended while establishing their presence before proceedings began. Jessica noted Dr. Rothschild entering accompanied by a man in an expensive suit, whose bearing suggested corporate authority rather than academic interest. A brief internet search on Jessica's phone confirmed his identity. Richard Meridian, CEO of the development company seeking the property. Their coordination is increasingly obvious, Jessica whispered to Marcus as they observed the pair in close conversation with Councilman Edwards before the meeting. The Historical Commission, development interests, and local government moving in lockstep suggests predetermined outcomes rather than objective assessment. The council chamber gradually filled with what appeared to be a carefully curated audience. Development company representatives occupied several front rows, while county employees filled other sections. Notably absent were community historical preservation advocates or independent academic representatives who might typically attend such proceedings. Their controlling attendance, Samuel noted, his decades of observing local government, giving him immediate insight into the unusual composition. Normal procedure requires public notice for emergency sessions, appears that was selectively distributed. This procedural irregularity provided potential leverage later, but more immediately concerning was the stacked nature of the assembled decision-makers. Jessica quickly assessed the 7 council members taking their seats at the elevated dais. At least 4 showed immediate friendly familiarity with the development representatives, suggesting predisposed support for their interests. Councilman Edwards called the session to order with practiced authority, his opening remarks establishing a framework that immediately raised Jessica's tactical concerns. This emergency session addresses urgent historical preservation requirements at the former Whitaker property, he began, using language that presumed authority over her homestead. County historical experts have identified potential historical features requiring immediate professional assessment and protection. We'll hear from the State Historical Commission and County Development Office before determining appropriate intervention measures. The procedural structure was clearly designed to minimize Jessica's input while maximizing institutional control over the narrative. Before she could object to this characterization, Dr. Rothschild was invited to present the Historical Commission's assessment. The presentation that followed represented selective information management at its most sophisticated. Rothschild acknowledged the likely Underground Railroad connection, while systematically minimizing its historical significance. Preliminary investigation suggests typical concealment architecture consistent with numerous similar sites already documented throughout the region, she stated, displaying photographs taken during an assessment Jessica had never authorized. While historically interesting, the structural elements appear to be conventional examples rather than unique or exceptional preservation candidates. Jessica noted the careful language, technically accurate regarding structural elements while completely omitting the extraordinary documentary evidence they'd discovered. More concerning was the unauthorized photography of her property's interior, indicating someone had entered without permission after her departure yesterday. When Rothschild concluded her deliberately underwhelming assessment, Richard Meridian presented the development company's position, framed as a reasonable compromise serving multiple interests. Meridian Development recognizes the historical sensitivities involved, he stated with corporate polish. We propose comprehensive documentation of any historical features before proceeding with our approved development plan. Additionally, we'll establish a historical display within the completed commercial center commemorating the site's heritage. This approach, documenting before destroying, represented standard corporate practice for managing historical obstacles to development. The proposed commemorative display offered the appearance of historical respect, while effectively removing any physical evidence that might contradict controlled narratives. When Councilman Edwards finally acknowledged Jessica's right to address the council, his introduction carried subtle undermining language about her recent acquisition of the property and limited historical expertise, clearly establishing a framework for dismissing her perspective. Jessica's military experience had prepared her for precisely this type of tactical disadvantage. Rather than defensively responding to the framing, she reset the terms of engagement entirely. Thank you for the opportunity to address this council. Regarding property I legally own and have been systematically researching with qualified historical experts, she began, her tone carrying professional authority that immediately commanded attention. Before discussing the Whitaker Homestead's historical significance, I need to address several procedural concerns about today's emergency session. This unexpected opening visibly unsettled Councilman Edwards, whose prepared process relied on controlling the discussion's direction. First, Jessica continued smoothly, unauthorized entry occurred on my property yesterday after I departed, as evidenced by interior photographs I never permitted. Second, this emergency session was convened without standard public notice requirements, limiting community participation in decisions affecting historical preservation. And third, no written documentation has been provided justifying emergency intervention regarding a private residence with no public safety issues. She paused, allowing these procedural irregularities to register with the council members. Even those aligned with development interests would recognize potential legal vulnerability in such obvious procedural overreach. However, Jessica pivoted, I welcome this opportunity to share the actual historical significance of the Whitaker Homestead, which extends far beyond the limited assessment presented today. With this opening, she yielded the floor to Marcus, whose academic credentials provided institutional credibility to their presentation. He began with conventional historical context about the Underground Railroad in Maryland's border regions before methodically establishing the Whitaker property's exceptional significance within that network. Using Samuel's family archives and their documented discoveries, Marcus presented compelling evidence of the property's central role in coordinating freedom routes northward. The architectural features demonstrated not typical concealment, but sophisticated engineering deliberately designed for sustained operation under heightened surveillance. What distinguishes the Whitaker Homestead from previously documented sites, Marcus explained, displaying their carefully selected evidence is not merely structural features, but the extraordinary documentary evidence preserved within them. With calculated restraint, he introduced the first piece of their documentary evidence, Hannah Whitaker's journal with its coded entries chronicling Underground Railroad operations. This established legitimate historical significance without immediately revealing their most sensitive discoveries. The council chamber's atmosphere shifted perceptibly as Marcus methodically dismantled the historical commission's minimizing assessment. Even development-friendly council members showed growing discomfort as the gap between Rothschild's presentation and the documented evidence became increasingly apparent. Beyond the operational documentation, Marcus continued, building toward their controlled revelation, we've discovered correspondence of national historical significance preserved within the hidden chambers beneath the Whitaker homestead. At this strategic moment, Jessica distributed copies of Dr. Porter's authentication report, officially confirming the discovery of previously unknown Lincoln correspondence while carefully limiting specific content details. The report's Georgetown University letterhead and Porter's impeccable credentials provided institutional legitimacy that even development interests couldn't easily dismiss. Dr. Rothschild's expression revealed genuine surprise. Clearly, she had known something significant, had been discovered, but apparently hadn't been informed about authenticated Lincoln correspondence. The development company representatives engaged in immediate whispered conference, their prepared strategy visibly derailed by information they hadn't anticipated becoming public. Councilman Edwards attempted to regain control of the proceedings. While historically interesting, this doesn't necessarily justify halting approved development plans. Documentation before construction remains a reasonable compromise. Jessica was prepared for this predictable response. The Lincoln correspondence isn't merely historically interesting, Councilman. It contains explicit discussion of Reconstruction policies never implemented following his assassination, potentially transformative historical evidence that reshapes our understanding of post-Civil War America. She strategically selected one quote from the correspondence that established significance without revealing the most sensitive content. In Lincoln's own handwriting, dated February 1865, he writes to Jeremiah Whitaker, "The preservation of these intentions becomes increasingly crucial as opposition to true equality grows among those who would maintain old systems under new names." The impact was immediate and visible. Council members recognized the historical implications of authenticated Lincoln correspondence, discussing Reconstruction intentions just before his assassination. Even those aligned with development interests understood the political consequences of appearing to prioritize commercial construction over such nationally significant historical discovery. Richard Meridian, displaying the adaptive capacity that had presumably built his development empire, immediately attempted to reframe his company's position. Had we been made aware of documentary evidence of this magnitude, our approach would naturally have reflected appropriate historical respect. Perhaps a collaborative preservation approach could be considered. Jessica recognized this pivot for what it was, a tactical retreat to gain time while reformulating strategy. She pressed the advantage while maintaining controlled disclosure of their discoveries. The authenticated Lincoln correspondence alone justifies immediate historical designation, she stated firmly. However, evidence suggests additional historical documentation remains preserved within the property's underground structures, documentation that requires professional archaeological assessment before any construction activity occurs nearby. Samuel, whose lifetime in the community carried moral authority with several council members, added his perspective. My family has maintained knowledge of these historical connections for generations. What's been discovered isn't just academically interesting, it's foundational to understanding our community's role in American history. Preservation isn't optional when facing historical evidence of this magnitude. The council found itself in a politically untenable position. The procedural irregularities Jessica had highlighted created legal vulnerability, while the authenticated Lincoln correspondence established undeniable historical significance that would attract national attention once publicly known. Even development-aligned members recognized the potential public relations disaster of appearing to bulldoze documented presidential historical sites. Councilman Edwards, visibly reassessing his position, proposed a procedural compromise that revealed the shifting power dynamics. Given the potentially significant historical evidence presented today, a 30-day moratorium on development approval seems prudent while proper historical assessment occurs. This temporary delay represented neither victory nor defeat, but a tactical pause, one that Jessica immediately recognized provided essential time to secure proper protections while preventing immediate threats to the property. She accepted the compromise with appropriate professional grace, having achieved their primary objective of preventing immediate development authorization. As the session concluded, Dr. Rothschild approached Jessica with carefully composed institutional diplomacy. The Commission would naturally wish to establish formal oversight of the authentication process for such significant historical materials, she began, her tone suggesting this was a foregone conclusion rather than a request. Jessica maintained polite professional boundaries while establishing clear parameters. Dr. Porter at Georgetown is already leading the authentication process with National Archives consultation. We welcome the Commission's interest and will ensure appropriate institutional cooperation once comprehensive assessment protocols are established. The carefully worded response acknowledged the Commission's legitimate role while preventing the immediate institutional control Rothschild clearly sought. The historian's slightly narrowed eyes suggested recognition of the deliberate limitation being established. As they departed the council chambers, Richard Meridian intercepted their group with unexpected directness. Ms. Harmon, your military background serves you well in tactical engagement, he observed, with corporate assessment rather than hostility. My company has significant experience integrating historical preservation with development. Perhaps we might discuss mutually beneficial approaches outside these adversarial proceedings. The overture represented classic corporate strategy, attempting to move opposition from public forums to private negotiations where influence could be more effectively applied. Jessica acknowledged his approach with professional courtesy while maintaining clear boundaries. Once proper historical assessment is complete and preservation requirements are formally established, I'm open to discussing compatible development options, she responded, neither rejecting dialogue nor surrendering. Her position, the historical significance, must determine the development possibilities, not the reverse. Meridian nodded with apparent understanding. Completely reasonable. What if Meridian Development funded a comprehensive historical preservation initiative, full restoration of the Whitaker Homestead, professional archival facilities for the discovered materials, and educational programming explaining their significance, all integrated with appropriately scaled commercial development on portions of the property without historical structures. The proposal was more substantial than Jessica had anticipated, a significant concession from his original plans that suggested genuine recognition of the discovery's importance. Yet something in his carefully crafted language triggered her. Tactical assessment instincts. Who would control the narrative about what was discovered? She asked directly. Who determines how the Lincoln correspondence and reconstruction documents are interpreted for public education? Meridian's slight hesitation before responding confirmed her instinct about the true objective behind his apparent generosity. Naturally, professional historical consultants would develop appropriate contextual materials, with significant input from institutional partners like the State Historical Commission. The arrangement he proposed would effectively transfer control of the historical narrative to entities already demonstrating alignment with development interests, preserving physical structures while potentially controlling how their historical significance was presented and interpreted. That's one approach. Jessica acknowledged neutrally. Another would be establishing independent academic oversight through institutions with appropriate expertise in Lincoln-era studies and Reconstruction history. Their exchange continued with professional courtesy, but the fundamental tension remained unresolved. Meridian's various proposed compromises consistently included mechanisms for institutional control over the historical materials and their interpretation, while Jessica maintained focus on independent scholarly assessment and public accessibility. As the meeting concluded without concrete agreement, Meridian made a final observation that revealed more than perhaps intended. These documents represent historically valuable perspective, Ms. Harmon, but perspective should be thoughtfully integrated into existing historical understanding, rather than presented as revolutionary revelations that might unnecessary controversy. The statement crystallized what Jessica had sensed throughout their exchange. Meridian's interest went beyond property development to managing how potentially disruptive historical evidence was interpreted and presented. Whether representing his own concerns or those of other interests, his consistent objective was controlling the narrative rather than simply developing the property. Following this revealing meeting, Jessica accelerated their historical designation process, recognizing that independent academic protection represented their strongest defense against narrative control as well as physical development. Dr. Porter's completed authentication report provided the foundation for their federal designation. Application, documenting both physical and documentary historical significance of extraordinary national importance. The application establishes multiple protection criteria, Marcus explained, as they finalized the submission. The Underground Railroad structural elements alone qualify under conventional historical site standards. The Lincoln correspondence provides exceptional historical significance that triggers additional federal protection protocols. Combined, they create compelling case for expedited designation. While this process advanced, Jessica received notification of another administrative maneuver. The County Tax Assessment Office had suddenly discovered a property revaluation error, tripling her property tax obligation effective immediately. This transparent pressure tactic represented classic bureaucratic leverage against private property owners, challenging development interests. Samuel, whose lifetime navigating local politics had created unexpected allies, arranged a meeting with a county tax appeals board member sympathetic to historical preservation. This local intervention, combined with documentation of the suspicious timing, secured temporary tax relief pending resolution of the historical designation process. These administrative challenges consumed resources and attention, exactly as intended by development interests seeking to wear down opposition through multiple pressure points rather than direct confrontation. Jessica's military background proved valuable in maintaining strategic focus despite tactical distractions, prioritizing the federal designation process while addressing immediate threats only as required to maintain their position. 3 weeks into the moratorium, their multi-pronged approach began showing results. Dr. Porter's comprehensive authentication received support from 3 independent academic institutions, creating irrefutable documentation of the discovery's historical significance. The federal designation application advanced to priority review status based on this exceptional authentication and the time-sensitive nature of the development threat. Most significantly, national media attention finally breached the carefully managed local information environment. A respected historical journal published a preliminary academic assessment of the Lincoln correspondence, describing it as potentially the most significant Lincoln discovery in decades, with profound implications for understanding his true intentions regarding Reconstruction. This academic publication attracted broader media interest beyond Meridian's local influence, creating public awareness that significantly complicated any attempt to quietly undermine the preservation efforts. National press inquiries forced institutional transparency from entities previously operating through administrative maneuvers and private influence. Dr. Rothschild, now under academic scrutiny beyond local structures, publicly acknowledged the extraordinary historical significance of the discoveries, while attempting to position the State Historical Commission as the natural custodian for their professional preservation. This transparent attempt to establish institutional control demonstrated growing recognition that preventing the discovery's acknowledgement was no longer viable. The strategy had shifted to controlling its interpretation and presentation. Richard, Meridian displayed characteristic adaptability by publicly announcing Meridian Development's commitment to honoring this extraordinary historical discovery through thoughtful integration of preservation and appropriate development. This corporate positioning attempted to frame the company as preservation partners rather than opponents, a sophisticated public relations approach that nonetheless maintained their fundamental objective of developing the valuable property. The growing public attention created both opportunities and challenges. National recognition strengthened their preservation position while simultaneously attracting more sophisticated opposition. Jessica noted increased surveillance activity around both her property and Samuel's farmhouse, suggesting professional monitoring beyond local development interests. The political implications of these documents extend beyond local development. Concerns, Marcus observed during their evening strategy session. They potentially challenge foundational narratives about Reconstruction's limitations and failures, narratives that have shaped policy approaches for generations. Samuel nodded with the perspective of someone who had witnessed repeated cycles of historical reinterpretation. Every generation writes history to justify its present. Documents that contradict comfortable narratives about why equality remained unfulfilled after the Civil War threaten more than development plans. They question why certain promises remain unfulfilled today. This broader context explained the increasingly sophisticated opposition they faced. Beyond Meridian's development interests, the documents potentially challenged institutional historical narratives maintained by entities with significant resources and influence. The academic establishment had built careers interpreting Lincoln's supposed pragmatic moderation regarding Reconstruction. Evidence of more radical private commitments threatened published works, departmental positions, and institutional authority. As the moratorium's conclusion approached, Jessica received two significant communications on the same day: preliminary approval of emergency federal historical designation and a private settlement offer from Meridian Development, offering substantial financial compensation for the property far exceeding market value. Meridian's slight nod conveyed recognition of both her position and her tactical awareness. Fair enough. My office will be in touch after the historical assessment process advances. As they left the county building, Marcus expressed cautious optimism about the outcome. 30 days gives us time to secure proper federal designation based on the Lincoln materials. Once that's established, local development approval becomes moot. Jessica maintained her strategic perspective, recognizing they had won a tactical engagement rather than the broader conflict. They'll regroup and develop new approaches. The development value is too high for them to simply abandon their plans, and the historical implications of the Lincoln Reconstruction documents potentially threaten established narratives that powerful interests prefer maintaining. Samuel's weathered face carried the wisdom of someone who had witnessed decades of similar struggles. Powerful interests have always found it more convenient to commemorate history with plaques than preserve evidence that might challenge comfortable stories. What you've discovered isn't just historically significant, it's still politically relevant to how we understand what happened after Lincoln's death and why promised transformation remained unfulfilled. His observation highlighted the core challenge they faced. The documents they'd discovered weren't merely academic historical curiosities, but potentially transformative evidence that directly challenged established narratives about Reconstruction's failures and limitations. The preservation battle wasn't simply about a physical property, but about whether long-suppressed historical voices would finally be heard. As they returned to Samuel's farmhouse to secure their evidence and plan next steps, Jessica reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since purchasing the old Whitaker homestead. What had begun as a renovation project for a wounded veteran seeking a fresh start had become an unexpected mission connecting her to the most fundamental American struggles for justice and equality, struggles documented in hidden chambers and preserved correspondence that had waited over 150 years to re-emerge. Her military service had prepared her to defend American principles abroad. Now, those same skills were being deployed to protect historical truth at home, evidence of unfulfilled promises and interrupted possibilities that remained relevant to contemporary challenges. The battle lines might be drawn in county zoning maps and historical designation applications rather than foreign terrain. But the fundamental mission felt surprisingly familiar: protecting essential truths against those who found them inconvenient. A 30-day moratorium created a crucial window for securing proper protection, but Jessica recognized they faced a sophisticated opposition, likely already developing countermeasures. While Marcus coordinated with Dr. Porter on authentication protocols and formal historical designation applications, Jessica focused on securing the physical evidence and property against potential threats. 30 days isn't much time to establish federal historical protection, she noted during their strategy session back at Samuel's farmhouse. We need to assume Meridian's team is pursuing parallel efforts to undermine our position or create alternative legal frameworks for accessing the property. Her assessment proved prescient when a certified letter arrived the following morning from the county building department. The official notice cited potential structural hazards requiring immediate engineering assessment at her property. an obvious administrative maneuver to establish alternative legal access despite the development moratorium. "They're creating multiple pressure points," Jessica observed, recognizing the tactical approach from her military experience. "If historical designation blocks their development plans, they'll pivot to safety concerns or code violations as alternative leverage." Samuel's decades navigating local bureaucracy provided practical insight into countering these administrative tactics. Building department requires licensed structural engineer certification to contest safety citations. Fortunately, I know several independent engineers, not beholden to development interests. This practical local knowledge proved invaluable as they assembled their response team. While Jessica's VA benefits didn't cover elaborate legal challenges, Marcus arranged university legal consultation through Georgetown's Historical Preservation Department. The emerging coalition of academic, legal, and local expertise created a more resilient defense than Jessica could have managed alone. Dr. Porter's authentication work proceeded with rigorous academic protocol, creating unassailable documentation of their discovery's historical significance. Her preliminary report had established Lincoln's handwriting authenticity. Now her team focused on comprehensive content analysis to establish the full historical importance of what they'd discovered. The correspondence reveals an explicit strategy for reconstruction that directly contradicts conventional historical accounts, Porter reported during their daily conference call. Lincoln and Whitaker discussed specific policies for land redistribution, political representation, and educational access that were systematically dismantled after Lincoln's assassination. Most significantly, Porter's team had identified references to the Maryland Compact, an apparently formal agreement between Lincoln and a coalition of Maryland abolitionists regarding specific Reconstruction commitments. This suggested their discoveries represented not merely private correspondence, but potentially documentation of unofficial political agreements made outside formal government channels. If this Maryland Compact represented actual policy commitments, Porter explained, it would fundamentally revise our understanding of Lincoln's intentions for post-war America. More importantly, it might explain why certain documents were deliberately concealed after his death. They evidenced promises that powerful interests preferred remain unfulfilled. This historical significance strengthened their preservation claims while simultaneously raising the stakes. Jessica noted how Dr. Rothschild's initial dismissive assessment had shifted to increasingly persistent requests for direct access to the documents. Requests that Porter and Marcus carefully managed to prevent premature institutional control. While these academic processes advanced, Jessica implemented practical security measures at her property. The structural engineer Samuel conducted thorough assessment, certifying the property contained no emergency safety hazards requiring intervention. This official certification, filed with multiple county departments, neutralized the immediate administrative pressure from building code officials. Additional security cameras with cloud backup ensured any unauthorized entry would be documented, while motion sensors provided immediate notification of unexpected activity. These protective measures consumed most of Jessica's renovation budget, but the historical significance clearly justified prioritizing security over cosmetic improvements. A week into the moratorium, Jessica received an unexpected call from Richard, Meridian himself, requesting a private meeting to discuss mutually beneficial approaches to historical preservation and appropriate development. The developer's direct outreach, rather than working through legal representatives, suggested a shift in tactics from confrontation to negotiation. Jessica agreed to the meeting with careful preconditions: neutral location, permission to record, and Marcus present as historical advisor. These terms, which Meridian accepted without objection, established proper boundaries while allowing exploration of potential compromise solutions. The meeting occurred at a local university conference room, its neutral academic setting appropriately serious for discussing nationally significant historical materials. Meridian arrived without legal representatives, another calculated choice, signaling personal engagement rather than corporate positioning. "Ms. Harmon," he began after preliminary courtesies, "your discovery has obviously altered the development equation significantly. I believe we share an interest in finding approaches that respect historical significance while allowing appropriate property utilization." His carefully calibrated opening acknowledged the discovery's importance without conceding the development's fundamental incompatibility with preservation. Jessica maintained equally measured engagement, recognizing that understanding Meridian's true objectives would provide tactical advantage. The historical significance extends beyond the physical structures to the broader evidence of previously undocumented aspects of American history, she responded. Any preservation approach must prioritize protecting both the physical context and the documentary evidence it contained. The juxtaposition revealed Meridian's recognition that their development plans faced likely defeat through the historical designation process. The settlement offer represented a final attempt to gain control of the property and its contents before federal protection formally prevented development. "The financial offer is deliberately overwhelming," Jessica noted during their emergency strategy meeting. 5 times the property's market value, designed to make refusal seem financially irrational. Marcus analyzed the detailed settlement terms with academic precision. The concerning elements are buried in the document transfer provisions. Accepting payment would transfer ownership of all discovered antiquities and documents to Meridian's historical foundation, effectively surrendering control of both physical property and historical materials. This final attempt to gain control of the documents through financial means rather than regulatory pressure confirmed Jessica's assessment of the true objectives throughout their conflict. The physical property represented valuable development potential, but the historical materials contained evidence that certain interests considered potentially disruptive to established narratives. With the federal historical designation proceeding and public attention established, Jessica declined Meridian's settlement offer through formal legal channels. Her response emphasized the property's exceptional historical significance, transcended financial consideration, and required protection as national historical patrimony rather than private development opportunity. 2 days before the moratorium expired, federal reviewers conducted their official site inspection, the final procedural requirement before formal designation. The inspection team, comprised of National Park Service historical preservation specialists, documented both the physical underground railroad structures and the authentication evidence regarding the Lincoln correspondence and associated historical materials. Their preliminary assessment, delivered verbally at the conclusion of their inspection, left little doubt about the designation outcome. The lead reviewer characterized the Whitaker Homestead as among the most significant underground railroad sites documented in the Mid-Atlantic region, independently qualifying for highest preservation priority, even without considering the extraordinary documentary discoveries. This professional validation from independent federal authorities effectively secured the property's protection regardless of county-level development pressures. The emergency designation process would conclude with formal protection before the moratorium expired, legally preventing development plans from proceeding regardless of local political influence. Jessica, Samuel, and Marcus gathered that evening to mark this critical milestone. While procedural hurdles remained, the immediate threat to the physical property had been effectively neutralized through proper historical designation. Their conversation naturally turned to the broader implications of the documents they'd discovered and the responsibility their protection entailed. Preserving the physical evidence was just the first challenge, Marcus noted, his academic perspective, focusing on the historical implications. The greater responsibility is ensuring these materials receive proper scholarly assessment and public accessibility, allowing them to appropriately influence historical understanding rather than being institutionally marginalized. Samuel, whose family had protected knowledge of these underground passages for generations, offered perspective shaped by lived experience rather than academic consideration. My grandfather always said truth buried too long grows stronger underground. These documents survived 150 years, hidden beneath floorboards. Their message deserves honest hearing after such patient waiting. For Jessica, whose military service had instilled deep commitment to American principles of justice and equality, the discovered materials represented not just historical artifacts, but evidence of an interrupted national journey toward fulfilling foundational promises. The reconstruction plans Lincoln and Whitaker had documented offered perspective on what might have been possible had different choices been made at crucial historical junctures. As they contemplated the document's implications, Jessica received notification that formal federal designation had been officially recorded, establishing the highest available protection level for both the physical property and its historical contents. This legal milestone effectively ended the immediate preservation battle, while beginning the longer process of determining how these materials would influence historical understanding. The property is secured, Jessica acknowledged, recognizing both achievement and continuing responsibility. Now we ensure these voices from the past receive the full and fair hearing they were denied in their own time. The single mother who had purchased an old Maryland homestead, seeking affordable renovation project, had become custodian of historical evidence that might reshape understanding of America's most consequential historical transition. Her military training had prepared her to defend the physical evidence. Her personal integrity would now guide how that evidence contributed to ongoing national conversations about unfulfilled promises and continuing responsibilities. Her daughter Lily, returning from her grandparents' extended visit the following day, would find their new home transformed not just by renovation progress, but by newfound historical purpose. A tangible connection to those who had created underground pathways toward freedom when official channels proved insufficient. The Whitaker Homestead would become not just their personal residence, but living historical testimony to both past courage and continuing responsibility. As the first rays of morning sunlight filtered through the renovated windows of the Whitaker Homestead, Jessica stood in the kitchen, her hand resting on the now-preserved tunnel entrance beneath a custom glass viewing panel. 6 months had transformed both the property and her life's purpose. The homestead now served as both her family's residence and a carefully managed historical site where scholars and visitors could witness firsthand the physical evidence of America's hidden history. The Lincoln letters had been authenticated, catalogued, and published, igniting academic reconsideration of Reconstruction's possibilities and limitations. Most meaningful to Jessica was the educational center she'd established in the restored Summer Kitchen Foundation, where local students learned about the Underground Railroad's legacy and the discovered document's significance. Lily had become an enthusiastic junior guide, proudly showing visitors the hidden passages where freedom seekers once found temporary safety on their journey north. "Mom, the school bus is here," Lily called, backpack already slung over her shoulder. Before rushing out, she paused beside the preserved tunnel entrance, touching it briefly in what had become their shared morning ritual. an acknowledgement of connection to those who had created pathways toward freedom when official routes proved insufficient. As Jessica watched her daughter board the bus, she reflected on how an abandoned homestead's hidden chambers had connected them to America's continuing journey toward fulfilling its foundational promises, a journey still unfolding in their own time. If this story of discovery and preservation resonated with you, there's so much more to explore on our channel. Hit subscribe to join us for more extraordinary tales of history's hidden chapters and the ordinary people who become their unexpected guardians. Turn on notifications so you never miss our weekly uploads of stories where past and present intersect in unexpected ways. Like Jessica's discovery, some stories wait generations to be told, and we're here to share them with you.